Hey y'all! Today you are with me, so buckle in. We'll be discussing the Narrative Policy Framework. Narrative Policy Framework begins with the argument that narratives are conducive to policy success. Thus, it's important to understand the power these narratives can yield. Why is that? When actors debate on policies, normally these discussions take place on the terrain of narratives comprised of both formal and informal institutions. Secondly, narratives can affect policy at different points of the process. Policy decisions, implementation, regulation, evaluation, the list continues. Hence, understanding the role narratives play in policy is to understand the policy process. This framework is not the first to conceptualize the importance of the narrative. Rhetoric has been a topic of study for some time. Narrative studies can be found in other disciplines as well, such as psychology, marketing, and healthcare. Narratives are like stories. They involve a beginning, middle, and end, along with a setting, plot, and characters. Narrative Policy Framework was officially named in 2010. Weibel and Zavatier began the work that led to this framework back in the late 1990s with the publication of the first edition of their textbook, Theories of the Policy Process. The authors faced criticisms with their first volume. Others felt that, because the work excluded post-positivism, the publication favored positivist-oriented policy theories, such as the Advocacy Coalition Framework. By 2000, two camps emerged over what was considered legitimate public policy theory. The first camp included post-positivists, those who understand policy as contextualized through narratives and social constructions. The second camp consisted of positivists, those who base their approaches to policy on clear concepts and propositions, causal drivers, prediction, and falsification. NPF developed out of response to these debates between the two camps and acts as a bridge between them with the foundation that narratives can socially construct our reality and can be measured empirically. Narrative scholars describe narratives in terms of their content and form. The form of a narrative is its structure, while its content involves the policy context and subject matter. The narrative form defines the policy narrative and consists of four parts: the setting, characters involved, plot, and moral of the story. Policy narratives deal with policy problems and are found in specific policy contexts. Thus, the setting of a policy narrative embodies policy conditions. These include, but are not limited to, legal and constitutional parameters, geography, or other features that policy actors agree that are ensuing within a specific policy area. Narrative is another word for story, right? All stories, or at least the good ones, have at least one character. The same goes for policy narratives. These characters can be victims, villains, or heroes. Recent studies of NPF explore beneficiaries of a policy outcome along with allies, opponents, entrepreneurs, and experts. But what's a story without a plot? The plot of a policy situates the characters and their relationship in time and space. Basically, the plot tells us what's happening, when, why, and how. Here's where events interact along with actions of characters and the setting. All of this can be arranged in the traditional sequence of events that consists of a beginning, middle, and end. The best stories have an overall point to them, or a moral of the story. In this case of policy narratives, policy solutions embody the moral or normative actions. The moral of the story gives definitive purposes to the actions of the characters and their motives. Policy strategies are used to influence the policy process and consist of three parts: the scope of conflict, causal mechanisms, and the devil-angel shift. Within the scope of conflict, a narrative is used to either expand or contain policy issues. When authors present themselves as losing on a particular issue, they engage in narrative strategies that attempt to expand the scope of conflict. But on the flip side, when authors present themselves as winning, they engage in narrative strategies that contain an issue to the status quo. Causal mechanisms arrange narrative elements to assign responsibility and blame for a policy problem. These assignments can be viewed as explanations for why and how forces lead to another in public policy. The narrative policy framework measures the double-angel shift as the extent to which the narrator identifies the opposing narrators as villains in comparison to how much the narrator identifies him or herself as a hero. The double shift predicts that actors will exaggerate the malicious motives, behaviors, and influence of opponents. The angel shift occurs when actors emphasize their ability to solve a problem and de-emphasize villains.